plenty of challenges already. We'll start with something reasonably high rated, I guess, as we. I sound like I sit in a washing machine. This is weird. I don't know why that should be, to be honest. Uh, my second machine is running and it sometimes does weird things with the fan, but currently it doesn't seem to be really going too hard on the fan. So some feedback on the sound and picture quality is welcome, but I don't really know what else I can switch off to improve the sound. It is an internal mic on this machine, which is not the best, but somehow I felt it wasn't my move there, which is a bit ridiculous. Let me just check. Not quite sure about b3. Should be a playable move, but I'm not certain if it's the most critical one in the position. I could try playing e5 straight away, or I could continue with the chosen plan of rook b8, b5. Let's keep doing what we're doing. And seriously, is the sound as bad as people are saying? Because to be honest, I'm not sure what I can do about it, but I could try doing something. d5, the knight probably will have to go to a5, but it's not such a horrible square here because I am fighting for the c4 square, which means that b4 is not going to be a huge problem. He still should do something like cb5, ab5, d5 here. I feel is a normal way of dealing with these things. For this move order, it doesn't really matter that great deal. I'm still playing bishop d7 here, and then there's a choice. I could play b4 here and drive the knight to some, well, arguably less favorable squares, or I could play, I'm not sure if e5 or e6 is the best move in this position. e5 kills off my own bishop on g7. I kind of dislike that. Before he just goes knight a4, and once again I'm stuck with this rather unfortunate knight on a5, which I don't quite like. I think I'll go e5. He goes knight c6, I can take with the knight, and I still have some issues with my position, but at least I trade off the knight on a5, which is not the best piece, obviously. He takes on e6 en passant. I will take with the pawn, and then I will have a mobile center, which could also be a weakness, obviously, but might be a strength in some positions. Yeah, and this is the problem. I will need to do something with this blockade. My position is reasonably solid, but the bishop on g7 is kind of passive right now, and the pawn on c6 might not be a huge problem as is, but might become a problem later on. I need to reshuffle my pieces here somehow. I'm not sure if e4 is a good move. I kind of forgot it even existed, but it might be a decent idea for him. I can take on d5 and play queen e6, because queen b5, rook fb8 I would welcome with open arms, but he might play rook fd1 instead. My biggest issue here still is what to do with the bishop on g7, how to include it in play. And on that note, I could consider playing e5, e4, maybe even immediately, actually, in order to bring this bishop into the game. If he takes and plays queen d4 check, I have queen f6, because now with the pawn on a3, I don't really mind losing the e-pawn, because I will take on a3 at the end of all those variations. activate my A8 rook, and have some counterplay on the queen side. I think maybe he should have considered playing E2, E4 at some point earlier in the game. This move I missed, to be honest, but I'm not sure if it matters such a great deal. I can still play Queen F6 because the pawn on B3 is also hanging. This is a decent move. I like this because he needs to try and keep control over the central squares. But I think I can spend one more move on improving my position, something like Rook FB8 with the ideas of Rook B6 later on. And also asking him, if you want to trade queen, sort of trade it on my terms, bring my king closer to the center. Finally, I will have to make these trades, but then in the end there I have Rook B6. And it's kind of awkward for him to protect all of his pawns here. I think I'm doing at least okay, and I might even be slightly better. I have a feeling I know where the sounds are coming from. I will try and do something about it I will probably take a slight break after this game and have to and try to do something about the sound issues. Maybe should have started with F5. I had a feeling this was slightly lazy not to start with F5 there. But here he created some whoops. This I did not expect at all. I don't know if this is such a great idea for him, to be honest. And now we end up in the rook endgame where I'm a pawn up and should have very, very decent chances of winning. Well, apart from, you know, the obvious time problems which I always have in these situations. Creating a threat of c5, I don't know if it's such a great threat here, but yeah, I'm not sure about this sequence of moves, to be honest. Not sure at all. I think I should probably push the c-pawn here. And now I can maybe play king d7 and king c6. This is slightly faster now. Take on b6 and then the c-pawn might run. I want to bring the king to d4 first so that his king cannot return to e3 and d2. I think it makes... Yeah, but now it's probably a draw. Yeah, should be a draw now. Very difficult to play these endgames correctly on such short time. I mean, somewhere around here, probably I shouldn't have gone for rook b3 and c5 at all. I should have gone for some strengthening ideas. Maybe h6 and g5 to minimize the number of pawns on the king side may have been a good idea in some positions. But yeah, my opponent defended well, and I did not really play particularly well from this moment on. Up to here, I feel quite satisfied with how I approached the position. Let me just take a small break to try and deal with the fan issues. Okay, so people are saying I'm not particularly good with computers, which is true to a degree, but I think this recent break was for a change not a lot to do with me, and mainly just a sudden break in a connection, which, as I may have mentioned when I was offline, doesn't really happen every month, let alone every day. I'm not quite sure why the internet chooses to die exactly when I'm streaming. Maybe there's some connection between those two things. Let's just pick something and see if it works, because I'm slightly panicked by now, what with all the technical issues. I'm not sure if Chess24 currently has technical capabilities for a real-life tournament, but I'm definitely not the one to ask. As you can see, I I definitely don't belong on the technical side of things in Chess24 terms. I can play chess, I can talk about chess, organizing things and doing, you know, even running a technically, you know, undemanding thing such as a, you know, a banter stream is almost, you know, the top, the top of my capability range. That sentence was very long and probably didn't end properly. Why did I play d5? Now I'm kind of tempted to play g6 and play normally, but let's try something more adventurous here. I kind of like this with white. The reason I'm not doing this with black is that basically what I'm trying to do here with black is play a Grunfeld a tempo down, because white, especially if you play knight c6 here and white replies with g4, we have a normal Grunfeld position in which white made an extra move with bishop g2, which is obviously not something you should be looking for with black. And if I play g6 here, it just means that I should have done it on a previous move. That's more or less all there is to it. So that already is a bit of a, you know, muddled thinking. If people could stop scaring me in chat by saying that it stopped working, I greatly appreciate it, because I go into a state of blind panic every time someone mentions that. The correct move here is castles, and if cd5 knight takes d5 is a very, very well-known position which is supposed to be completely equal, but it's also very boring to play. Problem is, if you take on c4, you're quite seriously worse. So I think I'll stick with the correct moves for now. This is a reasonably well-known position which appears from a number of different move orders, and is supposed to be completely safe for black. But injecting any kind of life into it is very, very difficult. For instance, there's an immediate repetition here. If white goes knight b5, black plays bishop b6, and if the knight returns to d4, the best move in the position is actually bishop b6, c8, repeating the moves. I've made more than one draw by doing that. e4, I think, is not a particularly good choice here, because you lock down your own bishop, and also you give me a tempo to play knight b4 here. And after bishop b3, I can play, for instance, knight c6, and it feels like the position is very symmetrical after takes, and knight c3, but because of the pawn on e4, I would actually probably prefer to be black. Let's say knight c3, I just play bishop b6, and it's a symmetrical position with white to move, and with the pawn on e2, the half tempo probably gives white some advantage, but with the pawn on e4, because my bishops, I think, are slightly more active than my opponents, at least optically, I would probably pick black here, although white shouldn't objectively be worse as such, but the pawn doesn't belong on e4 in this structure, it belongs on e2. And the game continues developing symmetrically, but already you can see I am actually threatening bishop takes c3 here, which will win me a piece, whereas his bishop on g2 cannot really touch my knight on c6, and it's a bit of a problem for him. And in this position I want to take on c3 if he doesn't play something like rook c1. I also have a very serious idea of knight c4, hitting the bishop on e3, hitting the pawn on b2. So it's already a position, let's say, in which white needs to be careful. I wouldn't want to say that I'm already much better or anything like that, but it's definitely a position in which black enjoys the more, the more comfortable play. Rook c1, I could go rook c8, but I also quite like knight c4. He probably wants to go knight d5 and reply and try to simplify into some equal endgame though. So maybe I'll change my mind for now and play rook fc8. I want to be able to take on b2. If he plays knight d5, I will take on b2, and I don't want him to have rook c7 as a reply. It's important to control the sevens so that white doesn't immediately get a great deal of counterplay here. You should probably go rook b1, because knight c4 d6 is kind of awkward, and if I play something like bishop b5, he has rook b5, which is also a little bit awkward. So I might not be as much better as I would hope to be here. But I'm probably still a little bit better, and now I'm definitely better because I managed to block the d5 pawn, and if he goes either bishop d2 or rook b5 here, I can play b6, not fearing the d5 d6 break. And this position is not equal. It wouldn't have been equal even if I didn't have an extra pawn on a4. But with an extra pawn on a4, I think an f4 is a mistake, but his position was already quite bad, and I'm also ahead on time for a change. So, yeah, this is completely winning now. My rooks just become active at some point, and the a pawn is also going to be decisive in many cases. All right, so hopefully there will be no more breaks in play, and let's go through the list, see what we have here. I was asked to try and play some marshals and try and explain this opening. I will give it a shot, but the problem with such a request is that it requires a great deal of compliance from my opponent. As you can see, already by move 3, no marshal for us. I haven't returned to this opening in a very, very long time. It's supposed to be perfectly fine for black, but you still need to remember some stuff. I have a feeling I can still play castles here. I don't need to protect the pawn on c6. Yeah, but this is a position in which some precision definitely is required from black, and I'm not quite sure what I'm supposed to do here. This is probably a bit too fanciful. There should be easier ways to play this position, but I became somewhat attracted to this nice geometrical motif by you play queen e8, you wait for f3, now the bishop on e3 is somewhat unprotected, and you can play knight d6 in reply, hinting at both knight c4, knight f5 in some positions. The pawn on e5 is hanging, so should definitely be at least fine now. I'm not sure if f3 was, strictly speaking, required though, so the objective merits of playing queen e8 in this position remain to be seen. It's a full pawn. I mean, I generally don't like to be horribly materialistic, but it is a full pawn, so I'll go for it. And I want to play f6 as early as possible here to break down his pawn center, because that's the one serious trump he has in his position. The f4, e5 pawns. Now he probably plays rook e1, making it kind of hard for me to play f6 comfortably. You should actually have reasonably decent compensation for the pawn there. I'm less certain about this move though. I think I'll keep the bishops on the board for now. I could also try to win some material, but then I could end up being stuck with very, very poor pieces. Maybe we can return to this precise moment after the game, and I can show you what I meant there. It's an interesting spot which doesn't come up very often, but does come up occasionally, and would be probably interesting to demonstrate. I'm trying to block him from achieving f4, f5, but I'm not doing such a great job. I think maybe queen e6 wasn't the best move in the position, because now he has queen knight f3, knight d4 as a follow-up, which will be very unpleasant to meet. My pieces are not particularly well equipped to deal with this. I might actually have to throw this in, because I really didn't like the idea of this knight landing on d4. And here the material situation changed once again, and I should have some compensation for the exchange, but maybe not as much as I would have liked. If I take with the queen as I was planning to, he goes bishop b2, and I don't really have comfortable squares for this piece. But gf6 is an ugly move to make as well. I'll go with the move which is, the slightly more natural one, but I kind of dislike my position here now, which is, well, unsurprising because I am on exchange now. I'm trying to get c5 and d4 in as early as possible. I'm basically paying no attention at all to the c7 pawn. Neither is my opponent's. He could have actually taken because d4 queen b3 check was very strong. I should start playing faster. h5 is a sort of a useful all-purpose move, but yeah, I played this badly at some point. At some point in this game, I misplayed it quite badly, but I'm doing okay now because we're both in, severe time pressure mode and making moves which are, very, very far from the best. I don't know if this exchange sacrifice was, at all required, but it looked attractive, so I went for it. I'm not sure where this is supposed to go, and I think, yeah, I'm probably gonna lose on time. Not probably, but very, very. Whoops. Yep. And trying to queen the pawn was obviously the final mistake there. Yeah, I wanted to return to this spot. After knight 4b3, I can take on d2. And what I didn't like about it is that he can take on c5 with a knight. I will take this exchange. He'll take on d2, let's say bishop c4, and rook e1. And this is a very typical position in which I'm an exchange and a pawn up, but if he gets, let's say, bishop d4 and f5 in, he will have tremendous attack on the king side based on the fact that my pieces are very passive. The bishop on c4 really participates in the game, well, none at all, it would be fair to say. And the bishop on d4 and the knight on c5 are such strong pieces here that despite being a great deal of material up, I would probably in a blitz game pick white here. Definitely in a blitz game, maybe even in a classical game, I would consider picking white here over black, despite being, as I mentioned, an exchange and a pawn down. But later, yeah, somewhere around here, I should have been more precise. Probably queen e7 not allowing knight c5 is an obvious candidate for an improvement over what I did. In the final position, I'm once again doing very, very well, but doesn't really matter because I have to be faster at some point. Okay. I think I know who this is, and if I'm right, hi Shahunsky, good luck to you. Maybe Marshall from the right, from the white side. Okay, not a Marshall. Not a Marshall. I'm not sure if bishop b3 is even required, to be honest. But in general, white is just very comfortable here. I could throw in ed5 at any point, and The pawn on h5, I think the idea of the h5 birds are to push it further down the board and try and discombobulate me on the king side, create some weaknesses, but in this particular position I think black will never be fast enough. I can even go knight f3 here, but I think winning a tempo with f3 followed by f4 is more logical. The pawn goes to f5 in a lot of positions in the bird. Sorry, couldn't help it. Yeah, you could try doing that, but to be honest, I'm not even sure I'm getting checked, let alone mated if I take on g4. I could also just completely ignore it, to be honest. But let's pick up the gauntlet. I probably should be slightly more worried than I am. It's not as straightforward as I thought originally. Knight f6 h5 is kind of annoying here. And then I will have to pay attention to what I'm doing quite seriously. And my problem, the only problem I have in this position, but a reasonably serious one, is this knight on d2, which has no moves. If I could somehow develop it to any kind of a sensible square, I'd be quite happy with my position. But as things stand, it's a very annoying piece. I'll try and do something about it, because black's play, for all its aesthetic attractiveness, is kind of slow, because he can play knight h5, I can play queen, well, both f2 and h2 actually, I'm not sure which is better. Then I can play knight f1, the knight can come to g3, and then the attack should be diffused eventually. I will play some lower rated people later in the broadcast, I promise. Rook e8 I quite like as a move here. Trying to make it harder for me to play knight f1. I think it's a good idea. I might have to play e5. Well, but this is actually a mistake. I could also take with the knight, but taking with the rook is even more attractive, I think. That was too fanciful. He should have just gone knight h5, queen f5, and tried to develop his attack that way. Because now I'm just completely safe here, and should be completely winning. One thing I shouldn't blunder is queen takes e4 followed by d3 check in some position, but I will do my best not to blunder that. And the king is completely safe on f2, which is the most important thing here for me. I can maybe even switch to the attack myself. Yeah, that was the one thing that worried me about playing f5. Maybe I should have been slightly more careful about this. But I still don't see where I'm getting threatened at all, to be honest, because I have bishop takes e1 in this position. My stuff is protected, so it's not such a great deal. Okay, by popular demand, let's play somebody below. Whoops, sorry, below 2000. And see if we can maybe, especially since it's a 5-0 game, I will have more time to explain basic concepts, which is also very, very useful. Another try to get the marshal on the board, and once again we're being foiled by deviations on move 3. Bishop c5 is the main move here, but I will try to play something else. This is a slower approach, but basically by doing this I'm trying to fianchetto my bishop, not develop it to c5 or e7, but to fianchetto it, place it on g7, and then play these types of structures. And now there's a helicopter seemingly straight outside my window for no reason whatsoever to further mess with my mic. And then the plan generally is to go for some kind of an f5 break. King goes to either h8 or h7, and then black plays knight somewhere in f5. But knight f1, knight g3 is a good reply to this, so I'm not sure. I'm not quite sure. I will improve my pieces slightly further from now on, and then we'll sort of reevaluate. But I feel it might be a good idea for me to stop knight g3, although this allows knight e3, knight d5, so I think my last two moves don't really go together very well. My plan was to go knight d8, knight e6, because once again, when you look at this position from the black side, you're trying to figure out which pieces you would like to improve the position of. And the knight on c6 is the first candidate, because when white doesn't play d4 in the Spanish structure, there's very little work for the knight on c6 at all. It's a very useful piece when you have to fight against the white center. But when white postpones or avoids going d4 altogether, knight on c6 is kind of stuck. And on e6, you could argue it's slightly more useful here. So queen e7 was played sort of with that idea in mind, to play knight d8, knight e6, because on e6 it might participate better in some play on the king side, which I would like to start eventually at some point in this game. But placing the queen on e7 there runs into knight e3, knight d5 in a lot of spots, so it was perhaps not the most precise way of dealing with the issues at hand. I can play bishop g4, but the thing is, once you've taken on g3, white is not at all worried about the prospect of playing g2 takes f3, so he can just unpin himself by playing queen g2 or anywhere. And I'm not really, at any point in the game, in a position to take on f3. I mean, I can, but it's not really particularly good for me. So I'm still looking for something to do here. The knight actually, now I realize it might belong on g4, but it's such a long maneuver. I'm actually seriously considering going knight b8, knight d7, knight f6, knight g4 here. But, I will probably not be allowed to make 4 moves in a row in this position. It feels a bit ridiculous. But, having mentioned it, I now feel slightly honor-bound to actually try and put this into practice. Let's continue with our stated plan. If it does land on g4, I will be extremely happy, but also very, very surprised. If he wanted to go g4, he could have done it 2 moves ago. I don't really understand bishop c2. It was doing very well on b3, so should be the best square on the board for this piece for now. It might be more useful in some others on some other squares later in the game, but for now I think I would have preferred it on b3. And now another justification for my long-winded maneuver from c6 to f6. I can now play d6, d5 if I want. Seemingly the machine I was trying to switch off some time ago decided not to switch off at all, and it's still hissing at me in the background, which is incredibly annoying because I went to an extreme step of pausing the broadcast for a bit, specifically to switch it off, and it just refuses to do so. So I will maybe have to address this again at some point. He wants to go g3, d4, which is a sensible idea, and I need to meet it somehow. I probably... Well, that's just a blunder. Talking about switching off computers, it switched off my brain for a second there. If he goes bishop d4 here, I just lose the central pawn. Or bishop f4 even. Both of these moves are very, very strong. I mean, the strategic idea behind f5 is solid. I want to be able to meet d4 with e4. But on a tactical level, it was just a one-move blunder, which went unpunished, thankfully for me. And I'm not taking on e3, which once again is probably correct from a positional standpoint. If he goes bishop d2 here, it's kind of awkward for me to protect the pawn on e5. So I'm kind of playing with danger here on every move, and the bishop returns to b3 as I mentioned that it really should now have left. But in general, my opponent has wasted a lot of time in the past, number of moves, doing not very much at all. So I will use the time given to me to occupy the center a little bit more. I can play queen b3 here and go into an endgame, but that endgame is quite comfortable for black, I think. Or I could maybe even keep the queens and play queen c6, because why do I want to give him? It seems, in all games, it seems a good idea not to give your opponent exactly what he wants. And now I want to play bishop d5 next move, which might actually force him to play c4 right now, objectively, because bishop d5 might be very awkward to meet. Because queen e2 here, I might consider taking on a2, but it's kind of boring. I would like to do something more adventurous than just picking up a pawn on the queen side. Probably the best move, though. Always feels a bit dirty just picking up pawns like this, but if it's absolutely the best move, you sometimes have to do it. And now white's entire queen side is under severe pressure. I could take the pawn as well. Also looked very strong, but this is also close to winning, and now the queen on f1 is trapped, so the game is about to end, I think. I can maybe even increase the pressure here, but yeah, my opponent resigns because I have a very wide choice of very strong moves here. This is probably the cleanest solution, because if he recaptures, then I can take on e2 twice, and the bishop on c1 will be hanging again. Let's do this again. Let's do this again. Let me know if it's back on, and I apologize for all this, but it just seems that the internet chooses to die for no reason midstream, which as mentioned, this is not a problem I encounter at all when I don't need it, but now that I do need it to be very stable, it's already happened twice today for no reason that I can see. I apologize for all the issues. And we will soldier on regardless, but yeah, it's all on my side, and I apologize, but I really don't know what I can do about it because it's just that the connection breaks midstream. So let's play the Rouser, made semi-popular again by the fact that it has been played by Fabiano Caruana in the decisive game of the Moscow candidates against Sergei Karyakin. It's kind of curious that the Rouser completely disappeared, well, more or less completely disappeared from top-level chess, because in the mid-90s, it was arguably maybe the most popular black setup in the Sicilian. Vladimir Kramnik played it regularly, I played it reasonably regularly as well. I actually had this position in at least one tournament game. This is kind of curious. h6, h5 I think is the correct way to approach h4. I quite like what my opponent is doing. But yeah, in the mid 90s, maybe even late 90s, this was quite often played at a very serious level by a number of people. And then it just completely disappeared for no reason that I can see. I don't think it has been refuted as such. It's just that people gravitated away from it, and it's no longer really part of any kind of repertoire in elite tournaments or even in tournaments sort of one or two ladder steps down from elite level. In this type of structure, you want to install your knight on d4 so that it controls the center, and then you play around it. You probably push for a 4 or 5 at some point. Normally you go for some kind of play against knight on f6 with g4 and g5, but once I play h4 and he goes h6 and later h5, these types of plans become much harder for white to realize. So I will make this slightly strange looking move because I really want to go knight d4 followed by bishop c2, maybe even bishop b3, and later play against the e6 pawn. And I'm not really that worried about b4. I can meet it in a number of ways here. Let's continue with the stated plan. If he goes b4, I can just take and place the bishop on b3, and it will cover the a2 pawn reasonably comfortably. And the endgame should also be quite okay for me. The issue for my opponent here is that in order to create any kind of an attack on the queen side, he needs to castle. And once he castles, g4 suddenly becomes once again very much part of the agenda on the king side, because all kinds of pawn sacrifices there. g4, h takes g, h5 becomes very much a possibility for me, maybe even immediately. I've been thinking about it for a while on my opponent's time here, and I think it's interesting. e5 with the bishop on b3 feels, let's call it brave. This is now such a monstrous piece. I'm not sure I needed to do this immediately. It's probably a mistake. Because now you can play e4 and bishop e5. I should not have allowed that. I'm probably still doing quite well, but it was definitely a mistake to allow that. The position could have been much more comfortable for me here than what it is. But still, the king on g8 is in a lot more trouble than my king on b1 here. e3, I want to play queen e2, follow it up by queen takes h5, g6, and just mate, frankly. So it's not actually mate. I think my opponent is about to resign, which is a mistake. He can play e3. If I play queen h2, he can continue with bishop d4. His position is not lost. I mean, it's unpleasant. Even here, I can return to e2, and the h5 pawn is hanging. I also have a plan of going rook d3, rook h d1, and playing against the bishop on d4. But that was a bit of a premature resignation there from my opponent. And he should have just castled here. I mean, it looks a bit scary, but if I do nothing, he can play rook a8, follow it up by bishop a4, try and trade off my bishop on b3, and then he will definitely have some counterplay against the a2 pawn. And if I play g4, let's say h takes h5, g takes f3, and it looks scary, but on the other hand, knight takes e4 is a threat now. And I would at least have to prove I have enough here for the pawns I sacrificed on the king's side. So I think e5 was an unfortunate decision. All whites. Let's switch it up a little bit. I've been playing. Yeah, sometimes there's a correct answer to that question, and once again, I apologize for all the technical mishaps I seem to be having today. And somewhat surprisingly, not all of them are even my fault, which is not the norm here. This is kind of an English setup where black plays bishop c5, and then I think normally plays something like a6, and the bishop goes away to a7. It's becoming increasingly popular, and it's an interesting setup. It's not at all ridiculous to try and do this. I'm not sure about a5 though, because for instance here, I can do this. Maybe bishop b8. I mean, it looks funny, but I think I actually would play bishop b8 here if I were in my opponent's shoes. Or g5. I quite like g5. I forgot about this one. This is a good choice. I completely forgot he has this option. Makes me really, really regret having played knight b5. I was never actually 2900 on this account, so yeah, I'm very far from it, but I've never actually been close to it on this account. I actually went above 2900 on Jan's account, but I started on 2890, so it wasn't such a huge surprise. I think I'll sacrifice a pawn here because I don't really want to. If I play c5, black's play becomes much easier. If I play b3, he can continue attacking my pawns with bishop b6 or something. So I will continue offering him this pawn. And, playing for compensation here, I want to play queen d4, rook e1, bishop f4. And now I get a phone call, which is, yeah. I think putting every single device on silent is a good idea before streaming, but I never do that for some reason. My next move is d6 if allowed, obviously, so he probably has to do something about it. Knight e8 is an ugly move to even consider. And here I can, well, I'll start with d6 and then I'll sort of, I'll let my opponent decide what he wants to do with this. He needs to sacrifice the exchange here somehow. I probably like c6 more than I like c5 because I would like to keep the knight on c3 from landing on d5 in the later game. This should not work then. I can actually take on b8 here, right, and end up with some extra material. Yeah, I think my opponent kind of miscounted what we end up with in this line, because I'm a full queen up here. I think his basic math let him down here a little bit. Can't really blame him for continuing, but he is a full queen down here, so it's not really out of the question to stop at some point. Okay. That's the hardest part every time, trying to pick uh, an opponent out of the list. Why am I always white in these games? I don't think he missed d6. I think he just disliked the options he had to stop it. And he could have actually played either c5 or c6, and after d7 he can take on d7 with the bishop there, and play a position where he has 2 pawns to the exchange. And I don't think black's position is even that bad. Let's try some f3, and I've spent enough time on various commentary streams trying to explain why this knight goes to c3 and not the other one, to sort of convince myself that this is good. Although in this particular position, I would actually prefer this knight not on a3 but on e2, so that my opponent would not have knight f4, which is what he's doing right now. But I think I can drive it away for the time being. And I want to prepare for his eventual f7, f5. I want to take and play f4 in reply. Not entirely certain I'm doing the right thing though, because he can. This actually loses material, but he had other better choices, I think, in that position. Here I'm not that worried. He will definitely have some counterplay, but I don't think it will be earth-shattering. My pieces are too well coordinated to be worried about any kind of b5 breaks or anything like that. Let's ask him a question about the f5 pawn. And here, yeah, this is just a full piece once again. So all of this kind of backfired for my opponent quite badly. But he could have played much slower, somewhere around here. First of all, even allowing all this and playing e takes f4 here, gf, and playing something like knight f6 is probably quite good for black. Well, good as in very playable. But also there was no rush to play f5. He could start his knight d7, for instance, because I'm not probably playing f4 on my own, although I could consider it. So I think my opponent got slightly carried away there. Oops. The usual misclicking happening. This is a famous misclicking stream. Okay, let's see if we get a marshal. And if we don't get a marshal again, I will probably quit the full marshal project and switch to playing something else. But I think he may have been watching the stream, and as such, he is aware that I've been trying to do this. So let's see if I can remember anything at all here. That's the biggest challenge in the marshal these days. You get some kind of a position which you studied at great length at some point in your life, and then you try to remember what's happening in there. And it's very difficult. For instance, the Queen E2 line. I was one of the people who actually pioneered this, and this is supposed to be a forced draw by now. And I should probably remember how, but it's very tricky to be absolutely certain about all of your move orders in these positions. Sorry. If you haven't repeated them before the game. D3 is what they normally do in these positions. You're correct, but D4 is the old main line. It's perfectly respectable. Yeah, and this position, for instance, I think I'm supposed to go knight f4 here, but I am completely uncertain about that. I think this is what I'm supposed to do in this position, and I think it's okay, but I could be totally wrong about all of these things. And trying to work it out on the fly in a blitz game is almost impossible, as for instance has been shown very memorably by myself in the World Cup final in Baku last year, where Sergei, after actually preparing for the Marshall for a number of days, actually, he mixed up his move order straight away, and I could get an almost winning position immediately out of the opening. And instead, I spent like 2.5 minutes out of the 5 I had in that game and played something ridiculous instead. So yeah, Marshall is a difficult opening to play in blitz setting. I think he probably needs to go knight e4 here. If he takes on f4, after bishop takes f4, I have a feeling I have very serious attack. But after knight e4, I've been trying to calculate. Rook takes e4 looks very promising, but he has bishop takes f4 as a reply, which has been worrying me. My original idea was to play knight d3, but now I'm much less certain it's any good. Because after he plays something like queen e3 or queen e2, he has the threat of knight f6, which could be very, very strong. Yeah, I think I may have misplayed this quite badly. Because rook e4, bishop f4, I think is just horrible. Although I don't really see any choice, so I'll have to go for this. The rest I like even less, to be honest. I will still have some compensation here, but I'm pretty sure I misplayed this and my position is not objectively good. Because here, unfortunately for me, I will have to go for this. And this is an attempt to sort of claim some kind of positional compensation, which might be enough to create enough difficulties for my opponent to make a draw somewhere. But I doubt it's any good objectively. My bishops are very, very strong here, so it's not that easy for him to deal with my setup. But conversely, I have no real threats here. I'm just playing on the fact that it's very difficult. My bishops control so many squares here that it's very difficult for him to make progress. So that is what I'm basing my defense on. I might also consider trying to drive the h-pawn up to let's say h3 in some positions. This blunders the exchange. I can play bishop f5 and win the exchange back, which I probably should do, although it will lead to a draw. But my position really cannot be better. So if my opponent decides to return some material and allow me to make a draw, I think I should take that opportunity. Yeah, queen g2 I think is the most accurate way. Although, let's try and maybe annoy him a little bit here. Let's try and pretend I'm slightly better. Which I'm not really, but there's no harm in trying. I mean, I probably would have taken with the pawn on e4 in his spot, because the position he is now going to find himself in is not actually very pleasant. This is something I could actually imagine winning even in a serious game, because it's very awkward for white to play now. And yeah, this is kind of an ideal scenario where I control the entire board and I can play against various weaknesses. It doesn't really help that my opponent is also blundering pawns everywhere. And I think by now I am winning enough that I can just do this. Whoa! Yeah, never again will I try a pre-move. If you ever see me trying to pre-move anything, just kill me. Okay. It was, yeah, that was a bit ridiculous because that was completely winning for me, of course, and it no longer is. Yeah, a4, just take on a4, ba, go a5, and queen c pawn. Or I could, if I wanted to be fancy, I could play c4 here and queen the pawns this way, probably. But yeah, just don't pre-move anything there. Anyway, moving on. Hang on a second. Trying to communicate something with the sign language because I worked very hard to switch that machine off, and I think it's about to get switched back on, which I really, really don't want to happen. Okay, back to chess. Yeah, people playing the French against me. This should not be allowed. But, somewhat luckily for me, we end up with a position I know a little bit of something about because I've been playing this against Sergei Karyakin seemingly forever for the past, let's say, 2 years. Should have gone e5. e5 is a completely empty move here. Doesn't really make any sense. But black should probably take with the knight. e5 does give white some play because you can try and play against the pawn on c5. You have various ideas here. But d5 knight takes d5, I think, is very strong in this position, as I think Sergei demonstrated in one of our games. And he did end up losing, but he had a very, very good position out of the open. White's plans here are, in many cases, bishop e3 will be an interesting idea. a4 is kind of annoying. And generally speaking, black's position, the queen side might become a target of serious pressure, so it's not that comfortable. And after queen b6, a4 followed by a5 is a decent idea in many cases. Sorry, I'm trying to correct some things which can be corrected. Here, I think I can play c4, try and uh, try and create some play against the queen on b5, which is not the most comfortable of pieces. Although maybe I could have started with something else, because now yeah, rook b8 is a good reply to what I'm doing. I'm not in time to play c4 here, which is something I would have wanted to do here normally. And yeah, I think maybe I should have spent one more tempo on something like bishop f4 before playing c4. c4 was a bit over ambitious. Knight f2, bishop take, queen takes d3. The queen will escape via f5 g6, even if the c3 pawn is not hanging. So I think I may have driven myself into a bit of a corner here with my previous choice. I think I can do this, but yeah, once you need to make moves which are as weird looking as rook a3, you've done something wrong. I wanted to play bishop f4 almost against anything and then consider playing c4 once again. Although, yeah, I seem to have missed the point completely. I guess my opponent wants to play c4 because, yeah, of course I should have mentioned that rook a3 c4, which looks like it's winning material, would be met by knight b3 d4. And now that knight on f3 is pinned, I can't really do the same, so I will have to address this issue immediately by maybe saying that the rook has done its job and I need to bring it back to a1 now. And here I can sort of do the same. Now that the rook on a3 is not hanging, I can actually do the same. There's some cheating discussion in the chat which might be curious, but I missed the beginning of it, so I'm not going to jump into the middle. I will not be, saying anything startlingly new if I say that there has been in history some cheating in online chess tournaments, and in general, this is the issue which makes, let's say, hosting huge important tournaments with large prize funds a bit of a problem on the internet, because it's very hard to monitor who is actually playing. Lots and lots of people tried different approaches to try and solve this issue, but as of right now, I don't think there is a solution. And we've kind of glided over a number of things in this game, but I think once again, in the position where my opponent played c4, he shouldn't have, and it led to his, very rapid and very obvious downfall. I'm not sure if h3 is such a great move, but I wanted my rooks on e1 and d1. Somehow I feel this has to be winning by force. But I can always switch to just trading everything off and winning some kind of an endgame where I'm 2 exchanges up, of course. If I want to be pragmatic about these things. Let's do something. In the recent Blitz tournament in Almaty, where a lot of very, very strong players played, and Jan Nepomniachtchi and Farrukh Amanatov ended being tied for first, with Farrukh having the better tiebreak. I think I played d4, d6 in more or less every single black game where I was faced with one d4. And I did okay. I've been doing this, I mean, this was something I did very regularly in my youth. It's not such a horrible opening, and also it leads to various somewhat non-standard types of positions which are very good for blitz because it makes people think. I'm not sure about a5. I don't think I actually needed a5. I've spoken, I think, at in enough length about the forthcoming Carlsen Karekin match, so I don't really want to, go over the same ground again and again and again. It's not actually horrible for white. I quite like my position, but I probably would have liked to get more. Because d5, d5, queen d8 followed by 5e4 is quite certainly not the way to treat this opening from the white side. So when you see this as a reaction from white, as a black player, you feel you should be much better. But I'm not really much better here. I am somewhat better though. Rook b1 was too slow. I think he should have gone bishop c3. I think that would have been a much better reply. This is kind of a very nice demonstration of the positional ideas of the opening, because by inviting d5, d5, queen d8, you're hoping to get some kind of an endgame like this where your king on c7 is better than his king, probably on g1, and if he plays e4, you have this d4 square to play with, but you're still, very far from winning or anything. And once again, my issue is how to bring this knight from e7 or g6 or any of these squares towards some kind of a sensible square, which I think is probably c5, and I'm now addressing this issue. After bishop d4, I will not actually be able to support my bishop with knight d7, which is kind of unfortunate. And once again, I think my opponent's play here is a little bit too vague. He needs to try and force some favorable trades, get some pieces off the board. But if he allows me to improve my position non-stop, at some point I will create enough threats. For instance, here, the pawn on c4 is probably getting picked up in the immediate future. Although he does have knight d3, but it already is. I'm forcing some concessions here. Bishop d4, c5, I'm not sure if, yeah, I mean, it's still the best square. And now I can finally start picking up material, and the position is more or less completely winning. I not only win the c4 pawn, but now the e4 pawn is falling as well, so yeah, the position is about to crumble. You need to be careful not to blunder some fork here somewhere, but shouldn't be such a huge problem. Yeah, it went kind of rapidly downhill for my opponent here. Not sure why he's continuing, but it is his right, of course. A question about my uh, long and varied seconding career. When you're helping people prepare for matches and for serious tournaments, what you're doing mainly is opening work. There's very little actual work on improving their overall chess game going on in these settings because as you sort of your question contains the answer because players like that are obviously already incredibly strong, and they generally come into this process with an already fairly defined set of problems, generally opening problems that they need to solve. And this is what you spend a majority of your time working on. So, in my experience, seconding involves, tremendous amount of, very, very detailed opening work and not a lot else. Although, of course, it's not the whole story, and generally there will be some people who are also working on getting mentally ready. But for me as a second, that never really has been my remit, so to speak. Bishop d6 looks a bit weird, but I need to support the e5, sort of over support the e5 pawn because I really need to play knight c5. And to do that, I need to bring the bishop from c5 to c7. And a4 is a little bit of tactic, which I think it's useful for me to grab as much space on the inside as possible. And if he takes, of course, I have b5 with a fork. And this way, I drive the bishop away from b3, I drive the knight away from c4, and now I can finally make the move which I was intending to make all along. Not sure what queen d1 is all about. But I'll bite, so to speak, and play h6. I think it's generally a useful move for me because I will probably at some point have to play e4, and then not having to worry about knight g5 is a useful thing for me. I could take on e4 straight away, but then both e5 and c6 would be hanging, and this way I'm preparing to take on e4 and follow it up with bishop c8 f5, driving the queen away from e4, and this will be a much more comfortable way of doing it for me. Just takes bishop e6. We end up. I could maybe do something slightly more ambitious there, but this endgame is very unpleasant for white. I mean, I blundered knight d4, which my opponent failed to spot. I think it would have been good for him to at least try that. But structurally, this is a very, very unpleasant endgame for white, even if he doesn't blunder the a2 pawn, because the bishop on h2 is completely cut off, and this I don't quite understand. I can just take it with anything. And now the a pawn more or less wins. And I can also play rook d8. I could play rook d8 on the previous move as well without b3, bishop b3, but I quite like it here as well. I mean, a3 was also completely winning, of course. Black is very spoiled for choice here. The the a-pawn just, the knight on d2 will not be getting anywhere close to it, so the a-pawn just wins in 3 moves here. Alright, doing okay so far. Let's try and look for some of the higher rated challenges in the list. Maybe we can find somebody. I played d4 and c4 in the previous 2 games, I think, with white, so it's knight of 3's turn. People have been doing this more. In the recently concluded, what I was about to say is no longer relevant, but in the recently concluded Grand Chess Tours in Paris and Leuven, c4, g4, b4 has been discussed a number of times, so it's becoming slightly more in vogue to do this than it was before. And this should be a tempo up Volgas, which is also quite good. Or Benko, obviously, for those of you who prefer not to call it the Volga. Although, because Black played e6 earlier than he has taken on a3, he will now be able to castle comfortably, whereas in many of the the classical Benko positions, and Black is in time with colors reversed to take on f8 and prevent the white side from castling. But here I think my extra tempo still means that I'm doing reasonably well. I'm trying kind of debating with myself whether I need to spend a tempo on d3, but I probably should, to never have to think about my opponent playing d4, d3 in any position. Rook fb1, knight b5, queen a3, knight d6, a kind of a very typical plan here. I can't say for sure if I'm better or not because I'm not a very experienced Benko player, and it's difficult for me to judge this position at first glance. But I know I'm doing quite well. It's important to create the a3 square. I mean, if he goes knight d7, you want to have the a3 square as a reply to knight c5. It's also obviously my next program move, so to speak, in these types of positions. But maybe start with queen a3 actually, make it harder for him to make his moves, because he probably wanted to play something like knight c5 followed by queen e7, which is a very harmonious setup for him, considering from the position he finds himself in, he probably wants to place his pieces on those two squares. So by playing queen a3 first, I am preventing that and making it harder for him to untangle himself, so to speak. And there was a follow-up question on a little speech I've given on seconding great players for big events. As for using the ideas you find during those seconding sessions and using them yourself, there's generally, it's a topic of serious discussion once the work is over, and the answer very much depends on a number of variables. Once the match is over, you generally should be. Once again, I feel kind of bad winning back material, but I think it's the best move in the position, so I will make it. once the match is over, you are of course much freer with the ideas, but uh, you generally don't use anything important you found as preparation for a big event before the big event actually happens, which stands to reason, of course. And then as time passes, uh, of course, it depends on the people in question, and there are uh, various arrangements made. But in general, these things are very time sensitive, and they're also in many cases sort of person sensitive because many of the ideas will be aimed specifically against a certain player. So once this match is over, it's no longer that important to keep those ideas a secret. And since I also have some experience from the other side, I've had people help me prepare for a number of candidates tournaments. I can say that I generally feel that once the tournament is over, everybody should be more or less free to play whatever. Uh, I'm not particularly strict as a boss in this respect. Should have gone rook b8 on the previous move because this way he loses the b6 pawn, and I should be much better close to winning. Rook b8 would have actually saved the b6 pawn, and black's position would still be maybe slightly worse, but not by a great deal. I probably didn't play the position, let's say here, I should be better, but here I'm no longer sure I treated it correctly. I think maybe after b6 I should have played rook a7 instead of rook b5 to keep his pieces as penned up as possible. But now that my opponent forgot about bishop c6, I'm once again much better. Yeah, you probably should go bishop b7 and try and control my pieces a little bit, but he is way too passive to actually save this unless I misplay it very badly. I can start a second front by playing f4 and creating some weaknesses in the center, for instance. Yeah. Mr. Discombobulated, which I'm sure he's come up with this handle on his own, but I feel it's one of my favorite words in the English language for some reason. So I feel immediate affinity to whoever this is. Don't really want to play symmetrical English, but this is what we are getting here. I will try to make it as non-symmetrical as possible by playing knight h6. So I was wondering if this will come up, but apparently the lineup for the Russian Olympic team for Baku has been announced probably a couple of days ago, because I think the deadline was July 1st, and I'm not on it. Which is not a surprise for me. I don't want to make it sound as if it's a surprise. I've had some advance warning this will happen, and what I will say is I did not say no to an invitation, so it wasn't because I refused, and the coaching staff obviously had their reasons. As for what those reasons are, and whether they're correct or not, first of all, we will see after the Olympiad, and second, I don't think it's my job to discuss that. I'm sure this question will at some point come up, and it will be adequately explained by the people who took that decision. So. despite proudly not developing the knight to f6 and demonstrating a rebellious streak here, so to speak, I'm still not sure what I'm supposed to be doing in this type of structure. The positions with double fianchetto are not among the most exciting in chess because a lot of material tends to come off once people start trading those bishops. So I will try and occupy the center here, but I probably shouldn't have been given this much of an opportunity to actually play in the center here. He should have played knight a4 way earlier than he would end up doing. He might play d4 here. It's a pawn sacrifice, but it might not be a bad one. Could probably allow him to equalize, but I think he should, because these types of positions he probably will not like very much. Because now his bishop on b2 is completely locked in, and I control the pawn on d4 with so many pieces that it will be very, very difficult to shift. D takes e3 actually wins a pawn. Does it? No, maybe not. Because if I take, he can take back with the pawn. If I take on b2, queen b2, knight takes e3, it allows knight f6 check, which is not something I want to do. So I will just ignore it for now and continue improving my pieces. A question from Electric Jellyfish: what do I think about Richard Rapport getting married at the age of 20 and whether it could have negative effects, as Radek Wojtaszek apparently says? I haven't seen any quotes from Radek. I may have seen something about Richard getting married, and I don't really know very much at all. That is to say, pretty much nothing at all about Richard's love life, which is as it should be. But my personal opinion on the subject, and also I think it's been borne out by my personal experience, is that if you marry the right person, quote unquote, the right person, the effects will be positive, and if you don't, the effects will be negative. But that doesn't apply only to chess; it applies to basically every aspect of your life after marriage. So nothing hugely sensational there, I can say. Why did I play f5? You can play knight f6 check here. I got slightly distracted by other things. Maybe starting with queen d7 was slightly more precise. But even here, after knight f6, bishop takes d7, I have rook e2. And this move is what I was sort of basing my decision to play f5 on. Now I'm probably completely winning. But knight f6 check would have created a lot bigger problems for me. If you want to issue a 4-minute challenge, you have to do it manually. There is a button there which allows you to choose whichever time control you like. It will require more than one click, but it is possible to issue a 4-minute challenge. I could just take on b2 here, but I think g5 is cuter, so to speak. Let's see if I missed anything else in the chat. Doesn't seem like I did. C4 G6 is something I advocate myself in my videos, so let's see if I can refute my own work somehow. But I don't advocate playing D6, so we're kind of in uncharted waters from now on. Not entirely uncharted, of course. This is just a classical King's Indian. But when I was recommending playing C4 G6, I wasn't really doing it with the aim of playing the classical King's Indian. Sticking with my H3 Bishop G5 sideline, which I'm not, greatly in love with, but it's very playable. No Pyongo I don't really teach at all in any shape or form, at least currently. I may at some point choose to start teaching, but as of right now, I don't do any teaching at all. And we ended up via slightly weird move order and probably with slight tempo imbalance in a very typical position of what I think by now should be called a Tomaszewski variation of the King's Indian, although of course he wasn't the first one to start playing this with white. But he is, I think by now, the most prominent white player of this structure in the world. And generally, I think in this position, if white is allowed to lock down the king side by playing h4 and g5, he should be doing very, very well. What is my favorite disco music? I think there is a contradiction in terms there. Not really a huge fan of the disco music at all. And here, I wanted to play bishop e2 and then play g5. If I play g5 right away, he will have some squares for this knight via h5 and f4, which is something I would like to avoid. So we'll go somewhat slower. I'll play queen e2, castle long, go king b1. And then we'll see what we can do on the king side. I do like jazz, but I don't really understand jazz well enough to, feel I'm comfortable talking on the subject, because I generally prefer to talk about things I feel I'm at least somewhat knowledgeable about, which means I generally talk about chess and sometimes cricket and maybe Hearthstone if I'm really, really cautious. And now I need to settle on a plan somehow. I could just switch completely to the queen side here. Might not be the worst idea in the world. Just forget about the king side for now and try and make progress on the other side of the board. Because I don't really feel h5 gives me very much, because I think he will just ignore it. And g5, I really don't like giving him knight h5, knight f4. This is not a particularly clever knight on f6. And I feel, giving it squares is wrong. He probably wants to play b5 next move, and I need to respect that, because then I will have slightly awkward choices for, in terms of squares for my pieces. But I feel I still should play this and then just go back to d2. But I probably should have made more progress than I have so far. And I will go back to playing h5 because I want to check if he wants to play g5. I will feel a lot safer if my opponent goes g5 here. And knight a4 is a reasonable idea, but I don't really worry about it that much because structurally I'm just so much better here, sort of all over the board that yes, black managed to open the b file, but I can play rook, let's say, I don't know, c2 or c3, probably c3 because I want the other one on c2. Although I probably don't want to encourage him to play something like knight takes d5 followed by 4, even if it doesn't work. Double along the c file. Now probably knight takes 6 was actually already a threat. I've been somewhat asleep at the wheel there because if you can win on the spot, you probably should win on the spot. Pink Floyd is definitely not disco. I quite like Pink Floyd, but they don't qualify as disco, thankfully. My taste in music, perhaps maybe regrettably, stayed the same for the past, great number of years, and it's basically Dylan, Hendrix, uh, Cream, that type of stuff. Tom Waits, and of the people who are still active right now, I'm a huge fan of Regina Spektor, but I'm basically stuck in the early 60s, I mean late 60s, early 70s, and have been for a while. I've heard to a question about my chess progress, whether it was linear or there were some spikes, so to speak. I think in most people's cases, you will find that they develop. There is a slow, maybe even not particularly well documented progress for a number of years, and then you see a huge spike. And I've definitely had a number of peak years when suddenly everything sort of came together. One such year was 1994 when my first GM norm was in January 1994, and by June the same year, I had, I think, 5 of them, and I had none before. So I guess you could say that I was ready by this point, and I just it no longer was a problem to get a GM norm anymore. And, 97 was the year where I started winning, lots of serious tournaments and did very well in my first ever World Cup, Groningen, and so on and so forth. All right, so we are almost up to 2 hours today, and we have an early flight tomorrow, so there's still some packing and last minute stuff to be done. So let's announce, I don't know, 4 or 5 more, and then we'll call it a day for today. And as I mentioned, I'm really hopeful about. For some reason, I have no real evidence to believe it will be thus, but I have high hopes for my internet connection in the house we rented on Sicily. So if the connection will be decent, I definitely will be streaming from Sicily. If not, my next Banter session will probably be in August because after Sicily, I'm going straight to be able to play much against MVL, which will be very interesting but also very challenging. What shall we play against the dragon? Let's try and not get the same position I seem to get in every single game against this opening I play on this server. People play knight c6, I always reply with g4, and I end up having the same position over and over again, which I'm frankly a little bit bored by. Let's try something else. It's been a while since I looked at this, and I think general consensus is black is okay here if he plays carefully, but white has been making some progress. I think I've seen some games in which white actually managed to get somewhere out of this structure. Curious if I wasn't supposed to go knight a4, now that I look at this position. But I think knight a4 is the move here. But somehow I would very much like to transfer my bishop from f1 to b3, but I don't really see how I'm supposed to do that here. And it's confusing me. It's confusing me a great deal, actually, because it's one of those things, you know, it's better not to know anything at all here and play fast, sort of under your own sail, than to remember really small snippets of information and trying to fit them into the position in front of you. In many cases, it's a lot easier, at least, to play from a completely clean slate. A very decent question in chat from Trying. Peter, in the age of computers, what does creativity in chess mean to you? It's kind of regrettable that it's not going to be very easy to answer, you know, considering I'm still trying to play a game of chess. But and also I think I blundered e5 here, which could be a very large problem. At least here I can play knight c5 and feel slightly safer about my life. Returning to creativity, I don't think creativity is in any way dead in chess because of the advent of computers. But computers do make it harder to define what that is. And over the board, creativity is still, I think, sort of self-evident, and there are people out there who have a reputation for being very, very creative, and you kind of know instinctively what that means. The aforementioned Richard Rapport probably comes to mind, you know, among the first here. Yeah, I've not really played this well at all. Should make sure I don't end up in a much worse position here. I probably shouldn't really, but I should play carefully. I will have to tolerate the knight on e3 for a while, but I'm hoping to eventually play knight c4 and trade it off. But I think even in the openings, I mean, computers obviously are hugely important tools in opening work. But even in openings, you still need to sort of prompt them in certain directions, and there's still plenty of space for and room, maybe is a better word, for creative approach in the opening. Although once you do come up with an interesting new idea, you probably will end up looking at it with computer help, because you want to, once the idea is there, cleaning it up will be done with the help of computers, of course. Given that the position could only be won, lost, or leading to a draw, when we speak about slight advantage, what are we referring to? we are referring. I mean, chess is still a practical game, and people are very rarely capable of playing a perfect game of chess. So when you talk about the slight advantage, I understand it's a bit of a vague term, but you mean, let's say that the position probably objectively is drawn, but it's easier and more comfortable to play for one of the sides. I think that would be a good start of an explanation for the term slight advantage. I'm not quite sure if I'm converting this correctly. What do I think about free rolling in chess? And by free rolling, Alexander Keller means playing complicated forced draws with white. It has its place, in particular in top level tournaments where everybody has by now looked at a great body of similar positions, and it's very hard to surprise people, and also uh, very hard to play something which they will be completely unprepared for. So if you find a reasonably new idea, which you know leads to a draw against correct play, but correct play is not very easy in that particular case, I think it often is a very decent idea to try. Although I understand that I'm not sure C3 is even required. I don't know why it might be this move, but it will make conversion, I think, slightly more straightforward. And I, in particular, wanted to kind of tempt him to go with E3 because then he will have fewer pieces to deal with. He wasn't actually. I was inviting this on purpose, so to speak, and this is luckily for me not a blunder of a pawn. I was about to say I actually blundered my extra pawn, but I haven't. I end up keeping it here because I can play b7 and knight c5. It has its place definitely, and you see those games a lot in top tournaments, especially in classical chess, where you play something you haven't played in a while, for instance, or your opponent hasn't played in a while and probably hasn't prepared for in a while, and you ask him a question whether he actually looked at this before and can he remember what he notes, what his notes say, or better yet, you ask him a question, find a draw in a position, even if let's say your opponent suspects the draw exists. Finding it in many cases will not be that easy. Yeah, many examples. I mean, in the candidates tournament, there was, for instance, a game between Hikaru Nakamura with white against Tanishkiri in a very, very sharp semi-Slav, which ended in a draw. That's an example of such an attempt ending how it's sort of supposed to end. But yeah, Nakamura against Karakin, where Sergei Fowler forgot how to make a draw in a very, very sharp English and lost in something like 25 moves, is a better example maybe because sometimes you win those games. So yeah, you definitely see this quite a bit in top level tournaments. So let's say, depending on how they go, either two more or three more, starting from this one. And I really hope my opponent is there because he actually went to the trouble of creating a challenge that I asked for at the beginning of the stream. This is a 4-minute challenge, which means that he went into manual settings and set this up himself, which I appreciate. Tourist advice for people visiting St. Petersburg would either be, visit as much as you can of the center, the Hermitage, walk along the Nevsky Prospect and look at everything and ask, if you have a guide, ask the guide. That would be, very, very basic, bare bones kind of advice. Or it could take, next hour, which we probably don't want. So I tried ignoring that question. I play this line very rarely these days, but I still play it occasionally. Was a reasonably serious part of my repertoire, what's it, 15 years ago or so. It goes e5 anyway. I have a feeling taking this pawn would be a mistake, so as in many cases in these types of Sicilians, you kind of ignore it and you play around it. It's not 100% certain, but I think it's overwhelmingly unlikely that I will play the video. And this is another typical move, which I'm not sure is the correct reply immediately, but it's very useful because we're using the fact that the pawn on e5 is currently pinned, and therefore he cannot take en passant on f6. And by playing f5, I'm severely limiting the activity of the bishop on d3. I'm preventing his knight from getting to e4, and just generally limiting his attacking options a lot. My family seems to be weirdly very insistent on using the machine opposite of the one I'm using today. I don't really know why. Apologies for all the sounds you may be hearing. This I quite like from my opponent. This is a very sensible idea because 97-96 was very much a part of my plan here. In fact, it makes me regret having played 97 instantly because now I've kind of locked in two of my pieces and they're both doing not very much at all. I should probably have started with something like bishop c5. And this is not a move I generally would like to make, but I need to justify playing 97 somehow, so I'm preparing 97 d5 as my next move. Uh, it's a long question, so I won't read out all of it, but in regards to trying to calculate your life and this having made me miserable, it's not the actual calculating, it's that, as I said in the interview, I badly misevaluated the position I will get at the end of the variation I was trying to calculate if we continue using the chess terms. And that position made me miserable. Not the process, but the end result was not what I expected it to be. And yeah, as Azure Mist mentioned in chat, saying that you cannot calculate life is maybe an overstatement. You can try. I mean, you can try, but you are sort of doomed to fail there because it's a game of imperfect information, which is a huge difference to most other games. I seem to be experiencing some internet issues once again, so apologies for that. And yeah, he shouldn't have gone, I think, bishop h4 in the first place, because now he's realized that, and he wants to play knight h4, which is a better piece for that square. Strange position. I'm not really sure where my pieces belong here. So I will continue making waiting moves, and we'll see where it leads me. I would very much like to take, if knight appears on h4, I will snap it off and feel much happier, because I will no longer have to worry about it at some point landing on g6. But unless he does that, I'm kind of struggling to formulate a plan. And yeah, bishop h4 is a decent idea. But I can sort of ignore it and wait for him to take knight e7. Or I could maybe play bishop c5 and keep on waiting. If he goes bishop g3 back, yeah, I don't know. I don't want to play bishop e7 because I don't really want to cut this game short. I will maybe make some kind of a waiting move. And now, let's see if I can make something adventurous work. b4 is probably very, very strong here. This, on the other hand, I'm not that worried about. So yeah, this game kind of drifted for a while, and then I found this tactical shot, which I'm not actually convinced is correct, but against somebody on 20 seconds, it's very strong. He probably should do something like f takes, takes, and maybe queen e2, rook f2, queen g4, and sort of call my bluff. Although e2 looks quite strong here. Maybe, as I mentioned live, b4 was a very serious alternative here, but then I spotted I have bishop e7. Because otherwise, if I take on d1 and he takes on c5, my position is probably completely lost. But bishop e7 is a decent choice here, because if he takes on e3 here, I will take on h4. And if he goes on g6, at least I win the exchange. Although the position is quite playable, probably. But what my opponent has done after rook c1 knight g4, I'm probably completely winning. Okay, one last one, and we'll wrap it up for today. And once again, apologies for all the numerous technical issues that kept cropping up during today's show. I honestly do everything I can think of before starting to prevent this, and yet they keep on happening more or less every time. I also should probably stop playing this, because it never really leads me to it never really leads to me enjoying my position, is what I'm trying to say. I should stick to playing the Sicilian. I really like playing the Sicilian with black, and not play the modern. Because the modern actually requires a lot more work than people suspect, I think. If you don't know what you're doing, your margins are very, very small. You're very likely to end up in a position you will hate quite badly. People resorting to heckling in chat to get a game. Not gonna work, sorry. Should probably castle. But now you can just take on b7, for instance, and put his knight on e4, and his position is, very, very solid, and my pieces are still quite misplaced. I'm not quite sure why he felt he needed to play h3 here. I will use this time to start at least some counterplay in the center. Although d5 is now possible because the knight on h6 is stuck. Maybe that was his justification. And if it was, it's quite a decent justification indeed. e6, I can play both knight b6 and knight f6 here. Although that wasn't actually very good, because he could take on f7 and place the bishop on e6. I was actually in a lot of trouble there. I should be thankful he decided not to do it, even though my position is still quite seriously unpleasant. Yeah, the issues with knight on h6 are still very, very difficult to solve. I think I will offer my opponent the pawn on d6 and hope that he decides it's worth his time to win it somehow. He just goes bishop d2 here, I'm quite seriously worse. I need for him to sort of overcommit in the center, play something like, I don't know, bishop takes d5, he takes d6, this is a very ugly way to play here, or g4, knight e7, he takes d6, but yeah, my opponent has so far in this game given me absolutely no reason to suspect he will do something as unreasonable as this. Yeah, this is all very sensible from my opponent, although this particular move seems to allow a5, which means he will have to waste some time going back, which I would welcome a great deal. I would very much like to somehow justify playing takes f5, because on structural grounds it's a much better move than a4, but I don't think it works tactically. Which is kind of regrettable, but I just spotted that I have a very nice tactic when the bishop actually goes somewhere, and I think my opponent has also spotted it, because otherwise he takes d6 is inexplicable. But if he goes bishop d3 here, apparently I can't do that. I'll show you after the game then. But now my position is actually quite decent. The challenge will be somehow winning it, but because there's still very limited material on the board, and white's position is quite solid. So breaking it down will not be at all easy, but I would like to try. He should take on c4. It looks ugly, but he still should. And if I take with the queen after rook c1, queen a2, he has queen takes b4. This move I don't like at all. This move should give me a very strong attack on the king side. Maybe starting with queen takes b4 was more precise. I don't know why I did this. But yeah, this is what I was talking about. Now I have very, very serious initiative on the king side and in the center. I briefly considered being fanciful and taking with the rook on d4, but I think he will just play queen takes b5, which I didn't quite like. Now I'm a pawn up, and after queen d2 I can win more material. The endgame will still require some precision, but I should be able to convert from here, I hope. Because it will not be at all easy for him to start pushing his his a-pawn comfortably here. I thought once again, but I don't know. It's still kind of tricky here, because if I allow the pawn to reach a6, I might find it quite difficult to win. Not quite sure what this move is all about, to be honest. I think I'm overreacting to his counterplay here. I think I'll just do this. And come in with the king, so that I no longer have to worry about a6, rook b1, rook b7, and then I can start pushing my central pawns. Once again, not sure about this move at all. May have been a mistake, but not a huge one. Yeah, now I should be winning quite comfortably. Of course, he should never have. I mean, the a pawn was his only trump, and giving it up for more or less anything was a very large mistake. This now, I mean, these pawns, they queen themselves. All right, and with this, I think we'll wrap this up. And the tactic I was talking about, I think my opponent suddenly realized here that if he goes bishop d3, which is the most normal move in the world, I have this move, which, because his rook on c1 is hanging and knight takes f3 is a check, actually wins me some material, which prompted him to make a very, very ugly looking move with xd6, which of course, you know, from a structural viewpoint, you never ever want to take on d6 here. It makes my bishop on g7 alive, it creates weaknesses in his camp, and so on and so forth. The bishop d3 knight e5 is a large problem. All right, thanks for watching. Once again, I apologize for all disconnections and problems with the stream and the fan sounds from opposite me, because there are some things apparently I can't control at all. And provided the internet connection is stable enough, I hope to do a couple of these shows from system. And on that note, thanks for watching. It has been Svidler for Just 24.